thank you for joining us for the Odgers Berndtson One Question Spring Series. My name is Jules McKean and I run the media practice for Odgers Berndtson Executive Search out of London. Today, I'm honoured to be joined by Claire Valoti, Vice President of International Business at Snap. Claire, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're very welcome. So Claire is, as I said, the VP of International Business at Snap. It's a camera company, the mobile app that represents the greatest opportunity to improve the way people live and communicate. And as VP of International, Claire's leading growth and revenue across 4 continents, including key markets in the UK, France, Germany, Nordics and the Netherlands, Australia, Israel, India and MENA. Gosh, a lot. Her priority is to unlock the potential of international markets while continuing to scale those that are already realised. Before joining Snap in 2016, she was the Director of Agency Partnerships at Facebook UK, Media Director at Weave, and Managing Director at Weave's predecessor, which is, of course, OT Media. Claire began her career agency side, spending more than 11 years at Mindshare across world-class brands. She's also a trustee for Founders for Schools, which is a charity that inspires students and prepares them for the rapidly changing world of work. She's a member of WACL Future Leaders Committee and is an NED of the startup social planning app How About. Claire lives in London with her husband and 3 daughters, Ariana, Alexia and Alyssa. Claire, thank you so much. So we've had a crazy year. There's been some stuff that we might want to keep, some stuff that we don't want to keep. But in your opinion, what, if anything, has our industry learned from the pandemic?
That's kind of, where do you start with that sort of open-ended question? I've had a head start here because I don't know how many you're aware. I have been speaking to a lot of founders and business leaders about their businesses, and I've called it the positive disruptor, which actually has given me probably a lot of tips to help me answer this question, because those businesses have accelerated a lot during the COVID for various reasons. But I think what I've learned a lot from those conversations, and then a lot just from my personal experience at Snap, is that I think the importance of companies being very value driven is going to become even more important. And I think the past year has taught us that. And I think it's taught us on kind of multiple levels. I wouldn't say there's like, oh, what do you mean by values? I think if values come from the culture that you build in your business, and like, what does that mean? And it has to be genuine and authentic because people see through stuff. I think the products or the service that you provide needs to be baked into like having a real purpose. And I will build on this. I'm not kind of just using loads of great buzzwords. And I think what COVID has done for a lot of people is made them ask a lot of questions about their own values and their expectations, which leads them into, as a consumer, like what they want in terms of where they buy from, what they do. They ask questions about where things come from. I think things matter more to people than ever before. So if I start with values and culture, I've always been a big believer. Like, I truly believe if I'm going to leave my 3 daughters to go to work, I have to love what I do. I have to love the people I work with. And that for me is all baked into ultimately culture. And I think the pandemic has made companies really be clear about what that is for them. And therefore, how have they reacted during COVID? I think a lot of companies have just reacted and gone, oh, right, everyone's working from home, people need this. But actually, I think employees, because you haven't got just the sort of fun stuff you can go do in the office anymore, right?
Yes, exactly. All of that stuff's gone. What's left?
So people want to feel they are connected into the company's values and they buy into that culture. And at Snap, we've got, and this is not my sales pitch at all, but we talk about being smart, kind and creative. And if you ask everyone at Snap, they would know what that means. And we always use the great example of being kind isn't just telling people how wonderful they are. It is about having a hard conversation because it's the kinder thing to do. And I think in the past year, I think we've learned that honesty and integrity and those sort of conversations are really important and have lots of value, and people need them. So I would say I have personally always believed in culture being key to business success. And that also, you know, I was watching some of your other interviews and the amount of people talked about the past year about around D&I. Well, for me, that goes back into culture, right? It goes back into your business and your belief system. And I think for me, again, D&I is such a great example because I can't bear, again, corporate jargon. It's about practice what you preach. And I think that has to be part of your culture if you're going to be committed. And I think it was Philippa that talked about inclusivity being key. And I'm a big believer in that. Diversity is actually one in a way, a small part of it, because if you haven't got an inclusive culture,
Yeah,
then the rest of it falls down.
Yeah.
So I think this year has really taught me values in terms of this culture piece, and the fact that when you employ someone, you are employing a person, you're not employing their skill set.
Yeah.
And I've always believed that. I remember when I was at O2, and Ronan Dunn, who was such an extraordinary leader, said to me, you know, O2, we really want people to bring themselves to work. And I thought, oh, that's a strange thing to say, because I've never brought anyone else to work. But I think there is a truth that a lot of people have never felt comfortable to sort of be who they are, and they sometimes put on this professional sort of persona to a degree. And I think COVID has taught us that's gone. I mean, we were just talking beforehand, like that my kids appear on the camera and there is nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, I just have to hope that mine are dressed when they turn up. That's the big fundamental here.
If I'm being honest, I have been known to have an issue with some children up here, with not too many about before bath time. So I think that for me has fundamentally shifted. I think corporate jargon is not ever going to wash. You have to live it, you have to believe in it, and more importantly, your employees have to believe it. Yeah. And then when I talk about sort of what's the service or product that you deliver on, and that's probably what I've learned the most from a lot of the founders I've interviewed, be really clear what's the purpose of what you've built. Like, what are you doing for I mean, the words I've heard a lot actually in a lot of the interviews I've done is how people have called their customers a community or their tribe even. And I think that's going to become increasingly important. We always talk about the Snapchat community. Like, it's not about a customer, because that feels quite clinical actually.
And not about a user, which is generally drugs and social media companies.
Yeah, I hate the term user.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that language matters to move to fans and communities.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it means you've gone from this transactional world with, dare I say, the customer, to actually start building like a relationship. And I know we will talk about that, but I think that's going to be even more important, because it goes back to this world of people questioning their values in society. And I think, how many of us ever believed we would live through a global pandemic? And people are questioning their own values and how they live their lives and where they want to live. And so I think as companies have to be really clear about what they stand for and what you're there to do, because I think people will see through it if you're one of those companies that you think you can just sort of switch, and you have to be agile, but you have to stay true to what your purpose is. And then building on the word purpose, I think to be successful in the past year, I think what we've learned is you have to show you do have a purpose, you care. And that's baked into your culture in the service you provide. But generally speaking, it matters if you're making a product, how you make it, where it comes from, the experience your employees have, community, customers, whatever our term we want to use, they care. So I think we've learned a lot, if I'm honest, in the past year. But I think it's all wrapped into, for me, it's all wrapped into, I think, societal changes. I think as human beings, I think we always heard, I mean, I used to hear my grandfather talk about being, fighting in World War II and thinking, yeah, right, it sounds horrific, but you couldn't really relate. I think this is the first thing that's happened to people, in parts, obviously other parts of the world have been through horrific times, but in terms of people like us in the UK, this is the first thing that's really happened as a whole society, that we've like really felt something different. When people were queuing outside the local Tesco's, it was a moment where I went, wow, I'm queuing outside Tesco's to buy, some bananas.
And it's interesting, isn't it? We've been talking to quite a lot of leaders about sort of their concerns about potential brain drain of really great talent for those companies who didn't already have a really clear baked-in purpose, and in terms of also an operating model that allowed transparency, allowed them to speak truth to power. And that, I think that, I don't know if you agree, but it felt like there was already the younger generation was already quite rightfully challenging what's the role that this company is playing in society that I'm coming to. And actually then sitting in, when you take out the extraneous fun of what the media industry, it attracts a lot of people because they like people, and you don't get to see people in the pandemic, and you don't get to go to the pub or actually even learn from watching. If you're a young person coming into the industry, the amount you soaked up from watching how people interact in the office and how your bosses react to things is sort of all gone. And once you strip out all of that extra stuff that made the long hours and how tough it is and the competition and all of that kind of stuff, and probably quite low pay, it sort of understandably makes people wonder, what am I doing here? And I think it's really interesting what you say about that purpose get all the way through. Everyone's questioning it now, and it feels like that's maybe this has accelerated that.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think that next generation, they were always already challenging, even the values of companies, the types of companies they want to work for. I think talent will win out here in terms of deciding how they work. I think I've been lucky, having been in tech for quite a period of time. It's always been a company that tech industry has been pretty good at being very output driven. So what I mean by that, and I still struggle with that, because I think I still probably have some traditional mindsets of like someone should be at their desk at a certain time, but that's very different in a tech world. Engineers tend to work differently to how we do on the business side and so on. And I think what you're going to see here, to attract the right talent, companies will have to be flexible, because I think that this notion of one way to do things is truly gone. The only thing I would caution at the moment, I think we're in a transitional stage where, how many days are we going back to the office, or should we go back to the office? And it's almost like this binary piece. And I don't think it's binary. I think we've got to work out, to your point, for different people at different stages of their career, or what they need to be successful at their job. And then figure out what role does the office play for you, and what role does it play for you to be at home? And I think they're the right questions to ask, as opposed to be so rigid, or it's days, or it's this. I think you've got to figure out, and I think for us, we're doing having a lot of discussion about what is the role of the office, which I think is incredibly important still, but I think it's going to play a different role. I think the other bit that's really interesting for people who are in global organizations, which most of us ultimately are, and for me in my role, I think it does allow us in one way to act far more globally. It's something our founder Evan has suggested, that like more meetings just by default go on VC, because actually in the past I would be one of the few people from outside potentially headquarters on the VC, and everyone else was in a physical room. So you felt like you were interrupting the conversation. Whereas now, when everyone's a box on a screen, it's a pretty even playing field, which is pretty powerful.
It democratizes global business in a sense.
100%. I do think the watch out for me is, if we're in a world which I think has tremendous value, that we don't travel as much as we did, because I think sometimes we travelled, and I sometimes question how impactful that business travel was. But I do think it will equally be important for people with global or international roles to remember, you still have to stay connected to a market physically, because it's when you go into a country and first-hand experience culture, can you understand nuances that lead to actually quite big impact in decision making. So as much as the VC world is incredibly powerful for democratizing a global organization, there is still tremendous value of being on the ground, understanding how a country operates day to day in its culture.
No, I think that's super interesting. And I think also there's got to be a bit of soul searching, hasn't there, at the senior level, that, for those of us who have got, larger houses and a nice garden and are out of the city, who perhaps in a lot of ways, understandably, quite happy doing what they do without coming to the office. There's also a kind of a moral duty to the next generation to be present for them and to teach them to be physically in the, so perhaps even more than that person might wish to do in their own world, they might have to come in and train and mentor and just be there to allow the next generation. Otherwise you're going to get almost like a kind of terrible sort of generational class system going on within who's, want to be where in the world.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. And actually I flagged that. I think if you have a people manager type role, whatever level that is, I think you do have a responsibility if you have team members who want to be present where applicable. But I think you have a responsibility as a manager. But I think equally we shouldn't make the assumption, obviously I'm privileged, I have a lovely family home, and obviously I have 3 kids, but my house feels as full as if I was probably in a small 1-bed flat. And I know I'm very lucky, and I know I understand I have privilege, but equally I don't think we should underestimate, just because people have larger homes or more comfortable in the material possessions, mentally, and being really candid, that's really tough for me being a working mum at home. And I've got an 18-month-old, and going downstairs for 5 minutes, she sees me, which is amazing, but equally then she's screaming because she can't understand mummy's working and she's at home.
That's terrible.
Yeah, and I have talked a lot about this because I've always been a real advocate of blended world of work, you know, work and home. But as I keep saying to people, I feel like I'm in a blender on full speed, and it's pretty tough at times actually to balance that there is no separation. So I think whatever your situation, even if you have bigger space or whatever it might be,
yes, very true.
It comes with different challenges. So I think we have to caution. I think whatever your situation is, it has been harder.
Yes.
And I think the office for some people might be the solution. I think for someone like myself, I think it's choice that is the solution, and it allows me to have more choice in how I manage my time and where I need to be. But I think this year has really taught me about empathy, actually, and really understanding it's hard. It's been hard, and everyone I speak to is because I'm so grateful. And I said, of course we are grateful, and we should be grateful, but it's okay to say it's been harder than it was.
You're so right, Claire. I think there's, you know, we're also used to, because we're checking our privilege in the right way. I think everyone's used to prefacing I know I shouldn't be finding it hard, but ultimately we are in a global pandemic. Everyone is finding it hard in their own way for all sorts of different reasons, whether you're alone or you've got a house that's too full or whatever, or somebody's very ill. And I think you're dead right. The kind of, you know, maybe breaking down some of these barriers by being kind of almost inviting it into people's homes on a daily basis enables you to, as you see, goes back to your point about seeing people in the round, perhaps does kind of engender a sort of empathy to other people's situations that perhaps we didn't have before. And maybe there's a humanity that we can try to retain.
I'd probably add, actually, I think there's a real responsibility on leaders to show up and show that vulnerability. And I have an all hands, and my eldest daughter loves to join it. And I can tell you, I'm trying to stay focused when I'm speaking to a large group of people across VC, and she's nodding, touching me, poking me, asking me questions about who's here. And it derails me, but I got feedback after that it was one of the best things people had seen, because it made them feel comfortable with their kids joining stuff, and it showed I was human. And I really encourage anyone in the leadership role to role model that, actually. Role model the chaos in your life or what's been hard.
Both genders, particularly men as well.
Oh, 100%. And bless, my husband's been extraordinary. And he has the same challenges. He's working from home and the three kids go to him as much. And I think that's really important, actually.
Yeah. No, I think that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. There's so much for us all to think about in there about, you know, there's no escaping purpose businesses going forward. They can't, you know, smoke and mirrors it with, you know, freebies and, you know, a bit of interesting kind of optics. It really has got to be kind of rooted. The vulnerability that leaders need to show, the kind of openness and the hiring people, not just the skill sets. There's a lot that is really brilliant. And sort of, you know, perhaps that, as you say, that kind of humility and humanity helps us to look at our customers into audiences and into fans in a different way as well. So thank you very much. Lots to think about, and fingers crossed that we all do learn those things from the pandemic and we don't revert to type too quickly. Thanks, Claire Valoti. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.